Can I help you? Oh my God. Were you just drinking out of my water? All right. Have we met? I don't appreciate it. No. Go drink Jake's water. Thanks. Excuse me. Ow. Quit it. Ow. Quit it. Okay. Welcome to another video. My name is Heather, and as always, I'm reading with a vengeance, and I hope you are too. I have a little bit of a different setup today. I just wanted to do it a little bit more casual. Also, if you hear some rustling in the background or some whining in the background, the whining would be Jake, who is behind that closed door behind me in our bedroom. He's got a window to look out. He's got the TV on. He's got the fan on. He's perfectly comfortable. The only thing he is upset about is that he doesn't have access to me. And that is because I have a little Miss Lucy running around. And if you watch my channel, you know that I am a recent adopter of an abandoned kitten. And, oh, speak of the devil. Hello, this is Lucy, and she's super curious. She's about, let's see, August, September, October, November. She's going to be 4 months old in a couple of weeks. We rescued her on the day a hurricane was supposed to hit, and someone had abandoned her. She was out on the street, and she was wet and scared and shaking, and she still should have been with her mom. Just kind of a spur of the moment, I adopted her. Anyways, back to Jake. We are in the process of socializing them. Jake has a very strong prey drive, so it is a process. But we have to be on top of it every day, giving them some time of supervised visits. She's got her own room with all the comforts that any creature could want. And hopefully someday they'll be friends, and this will not be such an ordeal. I had a root canal yesterday. Super fun. It was a root canal that I got years and years and years ago. So the crown was really old. And my dentist last summer said, hey, let's update that crown. So they went in and removed the old crown and gave me a temporary. And for reasons I won't bore you with, I feel like I'm already boring you with my dental visits, but had the temporary on for a much longer time than I was supposed to have it on. Then finally I got the permanent crown put on earlier this year, and it turns out that there was an infection, and so they had to go into that root canal again and fix that. So that's what happened yesterday. So exciting, such a fun channel. If you're new here, I normally talk about books and reading, and that's what I'm going to do. I just usually kind of give the people who come here on a regular basis a life update. What else? We have listed our house. We found a house that we want to buy, but it's contingent upon us selling our house. That's kind of a slow process too. I don't want to get too far into that just because, well, it's a little stressful if you've ever bought or sold a house. We've never done it where doing the buying and the selling at the same time. And that is quite the ball of wax to tackle. But I am here to talk about some more books that I've read over the past couple of months. You see a pretty healthy stack here, and this doesn't even count for all the audiobooks that I have read. I don't know if I'm going to get through all of these books, but I'm going to start with the DNFs that I've had. And am I going to talk about all the DNFs? I am going to talk about all the DNFs. I'm going to talk about the audio books that I have DNF'd. The first one I'm going to talk about is Off the Books. And I actually featured this in one of my new releases that I am excited about. And I really, really was hoping for more. This is by Soma Mai Shang Fraser, a contemporary fiction. It says coming of age. It says mystery as well, and there might have been a mystery in there. But this is supposedly a story about a woman who takes a job kind of as an Uber driver, and she ends up taking kind of a big job with this mysterious man with a briefcase who wants to go all the way across country, and he's really, really vague about what is in the suitcase, and things are getting really, really strange. And then finally, the main character finds out what's in the suitcase and what this guy's been up to, and the story goes from there. It sounded really intriguing. It just wasn't. We just didn't get to the meat of the story quick enough for me. It might have been timing for me too, but I just wasn't enjoying it. And so I DNF'd it. The next book I DNF'd is a very unpopular opinion. I have yet to meet anybody who has had anything but good things to say about this book, but it just did not work for me. And that is God of the Woods by Liz Moore. I gave this one a good try. I probably read 50%, which is a lot. I usually don't like to give up on something that I've invested that much time with. I have to keep an eye on her because she's already knocked over one plant and she chews on things. Anyways, I just couldn't anymore. I was waiting for something to get good. I was waiting for something to catch me, and I waited too long with this one. And it probably had to do with how hyped this book is, how much everybody's just talking about how much they love this book. And so I was waiting to have those same feelings, and I just didn't. There's a lot of people on Booktube who have been talking about this book, so I probably don't have to describe it to you. But I believe there's a dual timeline. There's a missing person from years ago, and then now there's a current missing person. And it's from the same family, and it takes place at this camp in the woods. There are family secrets and all that kind of thing, but I was bored. The characters were boring. There just wasn't enough of a grab for me. There needs to be something that grabs me, even if it's a funny character or just something small. Something has to grab me, and nothing to, excuse me. Anyways, I don't want to discourage anybody because so many people love this book, but I'm just here to tell you that I'm not one of those people. The next one I'm going to talk about, and I hope you guys don't mind that I'm talking about all my DNFs first, but I just want to get the downers out of the way. I usually talk about my books in chronological order, in the order that I've read them, but sometimes that ends with a DNF, and I just, anyways, you get it. So the next DNF was an audio DNF, another really popular book, highly rated on Goodreads. A lot of people really like this book. And that's Chain Gang All-Stars by Nana Kwame Adjei-Brenyah. And this is a kind of a dystopian sci-fi, not too far into the future look at our prison system. And it's kind of like Shawshank and Running Man put together. And it's about these two women who are gladiators, because that's how they run the prison system, is they have these fights for profit and they use the prisoners, and it's supposed to be commentary on our current prison system. And that's all great, but it wasn't for me. It was a little too far-fetched as far as the actual plot device of the whole gladiator thing, maybe a little bit too on the nose. It just wasn't for me. The writing seemed okay. It seemed like a plot that is for a certain audience. But again, I'm not in that audience. So I DNF'd that one. I probably maybe gave it 10% tops. It's one of those books where you can just kind of tell that I picked it up because it's so popular, but definitely not for me. The final DNF I'm going to talk to you about, I don't know if it's like super, super popular, but you've probably heard of it. That's All Fours by Miranda July. I have a copy just because it was in the damage pile at work, and I thought I was going to read it, but then it became available on my Libby app. And so I tried to listen to it, and I feel like I gave this maybe 10 or 15%. And there were some kind of cringy bodily function, maybe masturbation scenes that were just not enjoyable for me. I'm not a prude by any stretch of the imagination, but I don't need that kind of detail in my stories. You can just say, I had some alone time with myself and called it good. I don't need the details. I don't need to hear about your genitalia. I just don't. So by the second incident, and I'm not kidding you, like in the first 10 or 15%, not very far into the book, I was done, and it just wasn't, like, the story wasn't enough to overlook that. This is a story about a woman who I think is just disenchanted with her marriage, and she says she's going to go visit someone, and she ends up not going very far from her house, I think, and just kind of isolating herself in a motel room, I think. Yeah, and it says it's an unabashed curiosity about human intimacy, a story of one woman's quest for a new kind of freedom, absurd entertainment, part tender reinvention of the sexual, romantic, and domestic life of a 45-year-old female artist. And I was really excited about a 40-something main character, but she wasn't someone that I could relate to. So yeah, I DNF'd this one as well. All right, enough about the DNFs. Let's talk about the books that I read and finished and enjoyed for the most part. Let me see. Yes, 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 meh, yes, meh, and definitely yes. Hopefully, if I get through all these. And that's not even including the audiobooks. So let's go back and then let's do chronological. So it's been a while since I read this one, but I read Salvage the Bones by Jesmyn Ward. We have a couple of public book clubs, but we also have a staff book club where it's just the staff, and it's super fun, and we just meet every other month. And this was my pick for the staff book club. And I really kind of had to apologize to everybody because this is an exceptionally written book. It is an exceptional historical fiction story, but it is very dark. There is little to no hope. It's heartbreaking, but really well written. And as a matter of fact, everybody who did read it came to the consensus that I'm really glad I read it. I will never read it again. And I would never recommend it to anybody. So it's a sad story. So this takes place the 12 days leading up to Hurricane Katrina making landfall in southern Mississippi. And this follows a very, very poor Black family in a very, very poor, small Mississippi town. You have a father who is raising his children by himself. The mother, I believe, died a few years before. Then you have the eldest son, I can't remember his name, but you're mostly following the teenage boy, Skeeta, and his younger sister, who is 13, 14. What is her name? Esh. And she's 15, actually. Anyways, they all know the hurricane is coming. They are trying to make preparations, pretty much doing everything except evacuating. Meanwhile, Skeeta is raising his prized fighting pit bull, China, and she has just delivered a litter of puppies who are dying off one by one. And Esh discovers that she is pregnant. It took me a solid 8 years and a book club, really, to get me to read this book. I knew I wanted to read it because I've read one other book by Jesmyn Ward. I read Sing Unburied Sing, and it is beautiful. I read it 8 years ago, and it was so good and so well written, and I knew this was the book that I wanted to read next. But then when I read it was about, and it included dogs and puppies that were dying, I couldn't bring myself to pick it up. But then when it was my turn to pick a book for a staff book club, I said, you know what? I'm going to force myself. I'm going to force everybody else down the hole with me. So I picked this book, and I'm glad I read it, and it's beautifully written, and it highlights just one small family's struggle during an internationally known disaster. And that was eye-opening. And one of the things that I really appreciated is she explained a little bit the mentality of so many people not evacuating, even knowing what's coming, even experiencing it before, and just kind of thinking that you can endure it and make certain preparations for it and think that you can endure a hurricane of this level. And I appreciated that, because after one of these things hits and we see the devastation and we hear about how so many people die, and so many people ask the question, why didn't they evacuate? Why didn't they evacuate? And it does a little bit of victim blaming, and this does a pretty good job of explaining why that happens. So I appreciated that. If you're looking for sunshine and butterflies, this is not the book for you. But if you're looking for recent historical fiction in the South, in poor neighborhood, really, really well written, well researched, and I think even not just researched, but experienced by the author, and I mean experiencing a hurricane, this is something that you might enjoy. I know I did. I'm glad I finally read it. I'm not sure if I'll be able to read any of her other stuff. There is not a sliver of freaking hope in this book, not a single one. So beware. Next book I read and actually really, really enjoyed is The Little Liar by Mitch Albom. I did read the physical copy. So this is a story of a Greek Jewish family during World War II, during the Holocaust, as narrated by truth itself. This is multiple perspective. You're mostly following young Nico, who is an 11-year-old boy. He's the absolute essence of innocence. He never ever tells a lie. And then one day, as he and his family are herded onto the infamous trains, he gets the attention of a German officer, and the German officer takes advantage of Nico, and he gets Nico to lie really for the first time, with the purpose of saving his family. The German officer makes him think that that's what's happening, but that's not what's happening. And when Nico discovers what's happened, he basically ends up never telling the truth again. And you follow Nico as he grows up through the war years. He becomes a pathological liar. You're also following his older brother, Sebastian, who just is living on anger and fantasies of revenge against his little brother for sending his family to die. And also a girl that they are both friends with, who must choose between them. And you're also following a little bit of the German officer who betrayed Nico. It's a story about truth and innocence and deception and family and the power of love and redemption and all that good stuff. Mitch Albom is a really great writer. He's a really great storyteller, and this one was no exception. I really enjoyed it. I knew I would. I'm pretty sure I featured this in one of my new releases that I'm excited about many, many months ago. I'm really glad I read it, and I would definitely recommend it, especially if you like historical fiction surrounding World War II, which is one of my favorite eras to read about. The next book I read was Listen for the Lie by Amy Tintera. This copy is actually an art, and I actually listened to this, but I decided to hold on to this so that I can actually hold a book while I talk about it. There's something oddly comforting and satisfying about that. This is also a really popular one, and I think this one is worth the hype. It's a pretty good mystery. The characters are pretty compelling. We're following mostly Luci. I forget how much time has passed, but when she was a teenager, I think maybe early 20s, her and her best friend Savvy were like the golden girls of their small Texas town, thick as thieves. But then one night, Savvy's murdered, and everybody thinks Luci did it because she's found wandering the streets covered in Savvy's blood. For reasons, she was never charged with it, and she ended up moving away, going to LA, and starting her life all over again, never wanting to return to her hometown. But then a very, very popular podcaster decides to investigate Savvy's murder, or reopen the investigation on his own for his second season of the podcast. And so Luci decides to return home to help investigate and find out what really happened, and just kind of have a little bit of agency in that investigation. So she goes home, and of course everybody hates her. And she even gets gruff from her mother. Oh my gosh, Luci! Anyways, it's dual perspective. There's a couple little twisty turns. It was an enjoyable mystery. I had a good time with this one. It's a quick read too, because there's spots here and there where it is a transcript of the podcast. So that reads like really, really fast. To be fair, I don't even remember, not that I tell you, but I don't remember what the actual resolution of the mystery was, like who done it. So, full disclosure about that, but I can tell you that I was engaged in the story as I was reading it. So take that however you'd like. I don't have the best memory. I read a lot, so it's not completely unheard of that I would forget the whodunit part of a mystery, but I would recommend this one. It's a good, fun read. The next book I read was a collection of short stories. You're like, what? Heather reading short stories? Who are you and what have you done with Heather? Well, of course, the short stories I'm talking about are by Stephen King. I read You Like It Darker. If you know me, you know that he is the one person that writes short stories that I actually enjoy. I have yet to read any other short stories that I enjoy. This is his latest collection. He didn't disappoint. I really, really enjoyed these short stories. He's got just the right amount of horror, just the right amount of humor. He writes characters, I think, expertly every single time. Every book that I have read by Stephen King, which have been many, his characters are spot on. You can say what you want about horror as a genre. You can say what you want about Stephen King and how he churns out book after book. He's more quantity than quality, whatever. Most of the times I like his stories. I would say 98% of the time I like his stories and his novels. Absolutely 100% of the time I enjoy his characters. Good, the bad, and the ugly. So there's just something about the way he writes people. I feel like he just has the ability to really get inside someone's head and heart to create these characters that I just absolutely love to read. I listened to this. I can't remember if I mentioned that already. I listened to You Like It Darker. I couldn't get my hands on a hardcover. I never buy hardcovers. So I was actually really surprised when it became available on my Libby app as soon as it did, but it did, and I listened to it, and it was great. The next book I read was another audiobook, and it was a little bit outside my comfort zone, but I picked it up for a number of reasons. The book I'm talking about is Hum by Helen Phillips, and I read it because it was the book of the month for one of our book clubs at work, and my friend from work read it, and she absolutely loved it. But mostly I read it because it deals with very, very relatable themes. So we are dealing... This is dystopian sci-fi speculative fiction with a little bit of horror-ish. And we're in the not too distant future. We are in a town that is struggling with the effects of climate change. You can't stay outside too long because the air quality is shit. The heat is unbearable. So there's that going on. And there's also AI kind of taking over. And these AI robots are called hums in this world. And we're following May, and she is a, 30-something wife and mother. She's living with her husband and 2 children. And she has lost her job to one of these hums. And in an effort to relieve her family of the debt that is accruing, she offers herself up as a guinea pig to have very minute changes done to her face that makes her unrecognizable to like the CCTV that's everywhere, even to all the hums, because you have to kind of identify yourself to all the hums. And normally they do facial recognition. And it's a very, very subtle change. Like your family can recognize you, but see kind of a difference. Almost like, I don't know, have you ever had a friend get an eye lift or something, or have their lips done, or I don't know, lose 10 pounds and like there's something different, but you can't quite put your finger on it, that kind of change. So she does this for money and it helps, but she decides to kind of help her family reconnect. Instead of paying off all this debt and maybe paying the rent for a little bit longer, she spends a ton of money to go to this botanical garden retreat for like a weekend for her and her entire family. So, and it's in order to get her kids who are addicted to their cell phones and their devices away from that, and just reconnect with her family. Things go downhill so fast. I felt like a little frustrated with her decision to do that. You know, I'm not a mom, but I feel like there's a practical side of me. And actually, you know, when it comes to money management, I just, that blows my mind. You know, I understand the importance of reconnecting with your family and, you know, the importance of experiences versus things, but experiences versus rent and groceries, I really had a hard time with that. And so I was frustrated with May. You know, some bad stuff happens at this botanical garden. And of course, nobody has their devices to like call for help or anything like that. So there's some irony there. You know, when she's trying to get help from other people, she's not recognized and she doesn't have appropriate ID. There was a little bit of irony there. I think it was a really, really good story to shine a light on the good and the bad of technology and how it can work for and against us, and trying to find that fine line in between. I thought Helen Phillips did a really good job with that. If you're interested in that narrative, I think this is a good place to start. If you already read science fiction, I think this might be a little light science fiction, but if you're new to science fiction, I think this is a really good introduction to it. I thought it was well written. I definitely would recommend this, but I will read another by this author because I think she's an excellent writer and she's a pretty decent storyteller. So there were some scenes where I was on the edge of my seat wondering how she was going to get through this. And I definitely was intrigued about how she was going to wrap things up at the end. So, I mean, you really can't ask for too much more in a book. I mean, I do all the time. Yeah, this one was okay. This was pretty good. Between okay and pretty good. Okay, next up, I read The Lightning Bottles by Marissa Stapley. This is the author that wrote Lucky. However, I did not read Lucky. I read the physical arc of this. I love this cover. It's the reason I picked it up off the shelf, and then I read the synopsis and I was definitely intrigued. This one has the backdrop of the 90s music scene, the grunge scene in Seattle. I was a little bit a part of that. I didn't live in Seattle, but I was totally into Nirvana and Pearl Jam, Alice in Chains. I was intrigued by this story, and I was hoping for Opal and Nev type story. I was hoping for a Daisy Jones type story. I didn't get it because both Opal and Nev and Daisy Jones had more of a love story at the core of its story. And I feel like this is more of a coming of age of the main character, whose name is Jane. Yes. So you're mostly following Jane. Jane used to be one half of the duo, the rock duo that were the Lightning Bottles. And it was her and Elijah. They were madly in love with each other and they created pretty good music. They shot to the top, were world famous. And then one day Elijah disappears, presumed dead. And Jane becomes like the most hated woman in the world for reasons. Jane decides to get away from it all and she rents a house in a rural part of Germany and wants to just crawl into a hole and tell the world to piss off. But what ends up happening is that her neighbor recognizes her and just happens to be a huge Lightning Bottles fan. And she has kind of a clue to what might have happened to Elijah. And so Jane and this young girl, teenage girl, go on a road trip to track down this particular clue that leads them to another clue that leads them to another clue. And so the road trip aspect of it, I really, really enjoyed. I really wish there was more of that. It was kind of a coming of age with both these young women in different ways. There was a little bit of a mystery of what happened to Elijah and why. And so I did enjoy it. I wanted a little bit more. There were quite a few music references in this. So if that's your jam, pun intended, you will enjoy this, especially if you like the music of the 90s. I feel like the characters needed to be a little bit more fleshed out. I didn't quite connect. I mean, I cared about Jane, but she also kind of came off as a little bit self-pitying and kind of a doormat personality that I don't particularly gravitate towards. Really, the best part of the story for me was the road trip between her, Jane, and was it Hen or Hannah? It is Hen. Okay, I wanted more from that. I think if it was more focused on their relationship than on Jane and Elijah's relationship, I think I might have found it a little bit more relatable. If you go into this expecting Daisy Jones, forget it. If you go into expecting Opal and Nev, definitely not near as dark as that. Definitely doesn't really explore any themes of particular depth, maybe addiction, the price of fame. If you just want a decent story with a little bit of a mystery that has the backdrop of the 90s music scene, give it a go. Next book I read, I listened to, but I have, is this an ARC? So this has been sitting on my shelf. It's right before it came out. And I was really looking forward to this because there's a couple of Ann Patchett books that I really, really loved. I loved Bel Canto and I loved The Dutch House. I loved The Magician's Assistant. I loved those books. I still have Commonwealth on my shelf, but I went into this with really high hopes. I was really bored. This takes place in a small town in, is it Michigan? Yes, northern Michigan. And you're following a family, husband, wife, and 3 grown daughters. And they live on, I believe, a cherry farm. And when the pandemic hits, all 3 daughters come home so that they can all isolate together as a family. And as they're isolating, the mom, who's the main character in the story, what is her name? Laura. Laura tells her daughters, by request, the story of her affair that she had with this famous actor way back when she was a part of this theater company called Tom Lake. And it was during the production at this theater company of the play Our Town. Super popular play. I've never seen it. I don't know really anything about it other than what I read in this book, but I feel like not only do you have to be familiar with that play to really get the plethora of references to it in this story, but I feel like you would have to have liked the play too to enjoy this story. Otherwise, I didn't particularly care about any of the characters. I was bored and I did not DNF because of my track record with Ann Patchett's books and because this is a pretty popular book. It's pretty decently rated on Goodreads as well. No, why was this book so popular? If you've not read Ann Patchett, don't start with this. If you are making your way through Ann Patchett and you've loved everything that you've read, flip a coin because I mean, I've only read 3 books. Well, this makes 4, but before this, I had only read 3 books and I loved them. Yeah, so this happened. Go in with low expectations and maybe you'll have a better experience than I did. I was bored. I was bored. Of course, the writing's good. I was very disappointed and shocked, really, that this wasn't more compelling than it was. Said what I said. All right, I think I've talked about a lot of books. I'm going to save these for next time. But I am going to talk about one more book so that I don't end on a sour note. Do you see what I mean by, talking about the DNFs first? The last book that I'm going to talk to you about is Wrong Place, Wrong Time by Gillian McAllister. And between Gillian Anderson and Gillian Flynn, honestly, I don't know if it's Gillian or Gillian McAllister. This was the book of the month for our mystery book club that we have at work that I run along with one of the owners of the bookshop. I listened to this one. It was very well narrated. However, it was a little twisty. And for me personally, you might have this problem too. If there are certain time jumps, if there's multiple perspectives, time jumps is what I have a hard time with when listening, because sometimes I need a reminder of stuff and I like to be able to flip a book. So while the book was very, very well narrated, if you're interested in this book and you have kind of a hard time following when there's time jumps, I would recommend the physical copy. So the story opens up pretty strong. Again, Jen is a woman in her, late 30s, early 40s. She lives with her husband, who she adores, and her teenage son, Todd. The story opens up with Jen anxiously awaiting on Halloween night for her son to come home. It's past curfew, so she's up waiting late at night. And when she does finally see him come walking down their street, she witnesses him stab somebody to death. Police come, he's arrested, her mind is blown. That's how the story opens. And then the next morning when Jen wakes up, she discovers it's the day before Halloween and none of this has happened yet. She thinks she's having some kind of mental break because of the stress of seeing her son murder someone. And so she doesn't really do anything about it. Not that there's really anything to do. So she goes to bed hoping to get a good night's rest and, start to deal with this mess the next day. And she wakes up and it's the day before that. And every day she wakes up and it's either the day before, I think early in the book, she's waking up one day at a time before. Then as the story progresses, she wakes up with bigger jumps back in time, 2 weeks prior to that, even more and more. She finally kind of comes to the realization that this is happening to find out who this person is that Todd murders and maybe to try to stop it. As you read further into the story, you realize there's a little bit more to it than that. And I really, really appreciate that about this story, because at the beginning, when she's waking up a day earlier and she's trying to figure out what's happening and how this is happening, I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to continue with this story. It was a little bit far-fetched at first, but the writing rectified that, and the story kind of pulls you in enough so that you can suspend your disbelief and enjoy what's happening. Once that happened, and I was able to get through the slightly repetitive at the beginning, waking up a day before, and really no explanation of why this is happening, and you just kind of have to put that out of your head and just get into the story. So you think, along with Jen, that this is happening so that Jen can not only find out who this person is that her son murdered, but perhaps stop the murder. And there's way more to it than that. It's very well done. The mystery is very enjoyable. You learn some family secrets. Certain people aren't who you think they are. I really liked how it wrapped up at the end. Some people might say it was too neat. I don't care. I mean, it has to be neat when you're starting off kind of far-fetched. So if you're going to start off messy, you can't end messy. I liked the neat wrap up. So there's that. Very, very compelling read, very short chapters. It was fun. And there's just a lot more to it that you don't expect that I really, really enjoyed about the story. Happy to end this video on a good note. On a book that I would definitely recommend to you. That's it. Those are the books that I'm going to talk to you about this video. Have you read any of these books? What did you think about them? There's a couple of unpopular opinions for some of these books, really, really popular books that I just don't get the hype about. What do you think about that? Agree? Disagree? Arguments are welcome here. I hope you enjoyed seeing Luci. I think she's going to be featured quite heavily in this video. I hope all of you are doing very, very well. I realized I didn't say that at the beginning of the video. Thank you all for your support. Thank you all for watching. I really, really appreciate all of you. I feel a little out of sorts because I'm not in my normal spot. How do I end this thing? Oh yeah, bye-bye.